Have you ever sat in a like listening to everyone talk in circles for what feels like 20 minutes, and you know exactly how to solve the problem in 5 seconds, but you just deliberately hold back?
Oh, yeah. The classic tongue bite.
Exactly. You just sit there, you bite your tongue, and you carefully wait for the right moment to gently guide someone else to the answers, just to make sure a colleague doesn't feel overshadowed.
Right.
Or maybe you're the person who spends so much invisible energy managing the quote unquote mood of your team or your family that your own actual projects just end up completely on the back burner.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a very specific kind of exhaustion. It's the fatigue of constant microscopic social calibration.
Microscopic calibration, I like that.
Because you are essentially doing two jobs at once, right? You're doing the actual work and you're doing the emotional labor of making sure everyone feels perfectly comfortable while you do the work.
Yes. And that dual processing is exactly what we are focusing on today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, and if you've ever felt that lingering, unspoken fatigue, this one is for you.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to dig into this. I'm our resident expert for today's discussion.
We are looking at a really fascinating stack of sources today. We've got cutting-edge organizational behavior studies, some deep clinical psychology research, and cultural analyses as well.
It's a huge cross-section of data.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the core paradox we are exploring from all this material is this idea that highly capable, highly talented people are routinely, intentionally throttling their own talents.
Yeah, actively holding themselves back.
Right. Like they are operating at maybe 80% capacity max. And they take that remaining 20% of their brain power and use it entirely to smooth over relationships, massage egos, and just make sure everyone else feels safe.
And, society absolutely loves to praise this kind of selflessness. We call them team players, right? The glue that holds the group together.
Oh, definitely. The ultimate compliment.
But the sources challenge that. We need to ask a much harder question right out of the gate. We have to look at the data and ask, is this self-suppressing altruism actually sustainable for these individuals? Or is the friction they're absorbing just slowly destroying their capacity to function?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our mission for today's deep dive is to figure out exactly why people who care too much end up suppressing their own immense potential. And more importantly, how you, if you're listening and you're one of these people, how you can break free from this trap without suddenly turning into a selfish jerk.
Right, without completely overcorrecting.
Exactly. So let's start with what the organizational behavior studies call the 80% output illusion. Can we define what this actually looks like in practice?
Yeah, so the math presented in the text is quite revealing when we look at daily output mechanics. So let's imagine a highly capable individual, right? If they were to focus purely on their own goals, their own tasks, ruthless efficiency, they have the raw cognitive processing power to easily hit 100% or even like 120% output relative to their peers.
They're just naturally that gifted or capable.
Right, but instead of maximizing that output, they create this artificial ceiling. They consciously or maybe subconsciously cap their own performance at 80%.
And the other 20%.
They reserve that 20% of their cognitive and emotional bandwidth for a very specific task friction avoidance, generating psychological safety for the surrounding ecosystem.
So that 20% isn't just them being polite, it's active, high-level processing.
Oh, absolutely. It's highly active emotional labor.
Like it's going toward reading facial expressions in the Zoom gallery to see who looks alienated, right?
Yeah.
Or rewriting a Slack message 4 times so it conveys urgency but doesn't sound, too aggressive.
Yes. Or taking on the administrative busy work that literally no one else wants to do just to preempt a team argument about task delegation.
Man, that is exhausting just to think about.
It is. Now, here is where the illusion part of the theory comes into play. To the people surrounding this individual, everything feels amazing.
Well, sure, because all the friction is gone.
Exactly. The team's performance metrics are up, the collaborative vibe is great, the workflow appears totally seamless. The surrounding people feel like they are personally overperforming.
But they're not.
No. The reality, highlighted by the data, is that they're only overperforming because they are being quietly, invisibly carried by the person who is deliberately holding themselves back.
It's like, okay, think of it like a high-performance sports car towing everyone else's luggage up a mountain.
That's a great analogy.
Right. Sure, you're getting the whole caravan to the top and the people in the trailer are having a great time looking at the view, but you are perpetually stuck in third gear. You never actually get to see what your engine can do.
Yeah.
But I want to push back on this a little bit because a skeptic listening right now might look at this and say, well, maybe they just have poor time management. Maybe they just need to learn how to prioritize their own work over helping everyone else.
Yeah, that's a really common read from traditional management. But the research pushes back on that assumption quite strongly. It's not a lack of time management, it's a difference in values and awareness.
How so?
Well, to illustrate this, the sources draw a pretty painful contrast. They analyze the highly self-centered people within that exact same organizational environment.
The ones who don't help anyone.
Right. The ones who ruthlessly prioritize their own tasks. The research shows that often, these purely self-centered individuals are only achieving about 60% of what the caring person achieves, even when the caring person is actively throttling their own output down to 80%.
Wait, really? So the person suppressing their talent, even with one hand tied behind their back, is still objectively outproducing the purely selfish person?
Correct. And that is exactly why this dynamic is so deeply tragic and why it goes unnoticed by leadership for so long. When external observers, or even just friends, look at this highly capable person, they feel a sense of frustration.
Because they can see the potential.
Right. They can see the raw horsepower. They wonder why this person is making themselves so small, wasting their energy on an ecosystem that wouldn't necessarily do the same for them.
Which brings us right to you, the listener. Because if you are sitting there realizing that you are the sports car, towing the luggage, actively choosing third gear every single day, the burning question is why?
Why do it?
Yeah. Why do talented people do this to themselves? I mean, my initial assumption before reading these sources was that it just boils down to low self-esteem. Like they just don't have the confidence to step into the spotlight.
And that's what a lot of people think. But the clinical data suggests something entirely different. It's not fundamentally about a lack of confidence. According to the organizational psychology sources we're looking at, this behavior is actually a highly rational, deeply ingrained sociological survival strategy.
A survival strategy. You're saying they suppress their talent to protect themselves.
Yes.
That feels counterintuitive. I mean, wouldn't you want to show off your talent to secure your position?
You would think so.
Yeah.
But we need to look at the underlying sociology of group dynamics here. The texts point out a universal truth across human societies, one that is deeply hardwired into our evolutionary cytology. Extreme talent attracts extreme jealousy. It attracts resentment, and eventually it attracts sabotage.
The classic tall poppy syndrome. You know, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down.
Exactly. To understand the mechanics of this, the research uses a framework of 3 archetypes within organizations: the giver, the taker, and the matcher.
Okay, let's break those down.
Let's start with a highly capable person who operates as a taker. This is an individual with immensely high self-interest and literally zero interest in others.
Right.
They use their massive talent to just crush the competition, take all the credit, and leave their peers in the dust.
So basically the archetypal corporate shark.
Yes. And what happens to the corporate shark? The data shows they might experience this explosive, undeniable short-term success.
Like getting a huge promotion in year 1?
Right. But long-term, the trajectory almost always points toward ruin because society and the microsociety of the office will eventually conspire to drag them down.
It's like an immune response.
That's exactly what it is. People will stop sharing crucial information with them, they'll quietly undermine their projects, they will celebrate their failures, and they will just completely refuse to collaborate. The taker's excellence basically becomes a massive target on their back.
So if you are a genius-level talent, just being brilliant and showing it off is incredibly dangerous. You are inviting the group's immune system to attack you?
You are. So what is the unconscious defense strategy for someone who possesses this high capability but inherently recognizes the danger? How do they neutralize that target?
They become a giver.
They become a giver.
Yeah.
By intentionally using their excess capacity to help others, to share the credit, to absorb the busy work, they are essentially buying protection from the group.
They're paying off the mob.
Essentially, yes. They're signaling to the ecosystem, yes, I'm a very tall nail, but look at all the shade I am providing for you. My excellence is entirely in service to your comfort. Please do not hammer me down.
I have to say, looking at it through that lens, being the ultimate supportive team player suddenly sounds like a deeply mercenary tactic.
It really does.
I mean, it sounds like an entirely selfish defense mechanism just to keep the pitchforks away.
It sounds cynical if we assume it's conscious manipulation,
Mm.
but the texts are very clear that it's usually an unconscious social calculus. What is truly fascinating here is the psychological state this specific survival strategy creates.
Mm.
By constantly helping others, the talented person cultivates a state the researchers call pronoia.
Pronoia. Wait, I've never heard that term. Is that like the linguistic opposite of paranoia?
It is the exact opposite.
Yeah.
So paranoia is the deep-seated belief that the universe or the people around you are secretly conspiring to destroy you.
Right.
Pronoia is the validated empirical conviction that the people around you are actively plotting your success.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. When you are a highly capable giver, you systematically neutralize envy and replace it with gratitude and dependence. The environment genuinely wants you to succeed because your success is fundamentally tethered to their comfort.
That completely flips the script. If I'm the sports car towing your luggage, you actually want my car to keep running.
Exactly.
You're going to
Yeah.
put gas in my tank. You're going to check my tires. Because the second my engine blows out, you have to carry your own heavy bags up the mountain.
Precisely the dynamic.
Hmm.
To map this out systemically, the research lays out this fascinating matrix of survival. It divides organizational behavior into 4 distinct outcomes based on a person's level of self-interest versus their level of other interests.
Okay, let's walk through that matrix. What are the 4 quadrants?
Well, we've already covered the first quadrant, the taker. High self-interest, low other interest. And as we said, this inevitably leads to envy, isolation, and long-term sabotage.
Right.
Then in the second quadrant, we have the matcher. This is where the vast majority of the workforce sits.
Okay.
Medium self-interest, medium other interest.
Yeah.
It's a highly transactional existence. Like, I will cover your shift if you cover mine.
Just keeping the ledger balanced.
Exactly. This results in average survival. You don't make enemies, but you don't really build deep alliances either.
Just flying under the radar.
Yes. But now we move into the giver quadrants. The third type is the self-sacrificing giver. This quadrant is characterized by incredibly high other interest, but critically low self-interest.
Oh, this has to be the burnout zone.
It is the absolute definition of burnout. These individuals are exploited by the takers, they're emotionally drained by the constant output, and because they have low self-interest, they never advocate for their own recovery.
They just give until they collapse.
They eventually collapse or leave the organization entirely. However, there is a fourth category, and this is the ultimate goal the sources point toward: the other-oriented giver.
Wait, high other interest, Andy, high self-interest.
Correct. They care deeply about the success and well-being of the team, but they care equally about their own goals, their own boundaries, and their own capacity.
So they're not a doormat.
Far from it. The data shows this specific combination leads to sustainable success, immense interpersonal trust, and active elevation by their peers. They aren't just surviving the group dynamics, they are thriving because they've built an ecosystem that actively wants them to thrive.
Okay, that makes logical sense. But if the other-oriented giver is the holy grail, like if that is how you safely use your 120% engine without getting hammered down, then we have a massive contradiction here.
How so?
Well, why do so many incredibly smart, talented people get trapped in that self-sacrificing burnout box? Because if this is just a rational survival strategy to buy protection, eventually a smart person would realize the strategy is killing them, and they would adjust their self-interest upward, right?
You would expect that, yeah, if human behavior were purely rational. But this brings us to a crucial pivot in the psychological research. When this self-suppressing behavior stops being a healthy defense and morphs into a one-way ticket to burnout, we can no longer view it just through the lens of organizational strategy.
Where do we look then?
We have to look inward to clinical psychology.
Wait, so you're saying if 2 people are in the exact same toxic office, the reason they have completely different breaking points is it a deeper wiring issue?
Yes, exactly. For many of the individuals trapped in the self-sacrificing quadrant, their people-pleasing isn't just a tactic they picked up in their first corporate job. The clinical psychologists in these texts argue it's driven by what they call early maladaptive schemas.
Early maladaptive schemas.
Right. These are deep structural blueprints of how the world works, and they are almost always formed in early childhood.
So we're essentially talking about running an outdated childhood operating system on adult hardware. Like the defense mechanism that kept you safe in your living room at age 7 is now completely crashing your career at age 30.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. The research points out that these schemas are frequently formed in dysfunctional or highly stressed homes.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, perhaps the parents were emotionally fragile, volatile, or just chronically overwhelmed by life circumstances. In those environments, the child quickly learns that they cannot just be a child. They
Right.
can't express their own needs, their own anger, or their own sadness, because doing so might trigger an adult's breakdown or spark a volatile reaction. The child instinctively learns to manage the adult's emotions just to keep the household safe.
Wow. They basically become a tiny emotional thermostat for the entire house.
Yeah.
They walk in from school, read the room instantly, and adjust. Like, if mom is stressed about bills, I will be perfectly quiet and demand nothing. If dad is angry, I will be aggressively helpful and go clean the kitchen.
Exactly. They learn that safety equals the suppression of the self in service to the environment, and they carry that exact same thermostat into the office decades later.
That's wild.
The sources actually outline 5 specific schemas that drive this chronic self-suppression. But rather than just listing them out like a textbook, let's look at how they actually manifest in a real-world scenario. Let's imagine a highly capable project manager. We'll call him Alex.
Okay, let's look at Alex's outdated operating system.
So Alex is in a Friday afternoon meeting. The director walks in and suddenly cuts the project timeline in half, demanding the teamwork over the weekend. The first schema that might activate for Alex is the subjugation schema.
Subjugation, meaning what?
This schema is fundamentally rooted in fear. It's the deep-seated belief that expressing your own preference, your own opinion, or setting a boundary will directly and immediately lead to punishment or retaliation.
Okay, so in the meeting, Alex doesn't argue about the unrealistic timeline. He doesn't say, hey, this is going to burn out the team. He just nods, takes the notes, and accepts the weekend work.
Right. And it's not because he secretly agrees with the timeline. It's because his childhood wiring tells him that pushing back against authority equals danger.
Right, he's surviving the living room again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But let's say Alex isn't driven by fear. Let's say he's driven by the second one, the approval-seeking schema.
Okay, how is that different?
Here, the individual's entire sense of self-worth is completely outsourced to the applause and validation of others. If they aren't being actively praised, they feel worthless.
Ah. So in this version of the story, Alex volunteers to take on the hardest parts of the weekend work, not because he's terrified of the director, but because he is desperate for the director to say, Alex, you are a lifesaver. I don't know what I'd do without you.
Yes. He's addicted to the gold stars. They become corporate chameleons. They figure out exactly what the authority figure values, and they perform that role perfectly.
But that has to take a toll.
Oh, the clinical result is intense, chronic anxiety, because their value is tied to shifting external evaluations. If the director's mood changes on Monday, Alex's entire sense of self-worth just crumbles.
That sounds exhausting. You're basically building your house on sand. What about the other schemas?
Well, let's look at the third one, the self-sacrifice schema.
Yeah.
This is arguably the most insidious. This is the deep internal belief that if you do not prioritize the pain and needs of others over your own, you are a fundamentally cold, selfish, and bad person.
Wow. So it's not about fear or praise. It's an issue of morality.
Exactly.
So it's not just I like helping. It's if I don't help my coworkers this weekend, even though my own family needs me, I am a monster.
Precisely. And a psychological result of this specific schema is chronic, unexplained fatigue, and often a hidden, slow-boiling resentment.
Resentment? Towards who?
Towards everyone. Because Alex is constantly giving, but he feels he has absolutely no choice, so he secretly resents the very coworkers he is saving.
Man, it's like volunteering for the mountain rescue squad every single day, but secretly you're furious that people keep deciding to go hiking.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
Okay, so we have subjugation, approval-seeking, and self-sacrifice. What else is driving Alex?
The fourth is the abandonment schema. This is the absolute terror that one single mistake, one moment of friction will cause people to leave them, resulting in total isolation.
Oh, man.
So in our meeting scenario, Alex accepts the weekend work because he genuinely believes that if he says no, the team won't just be mildly annoyed, they will completely excommunicate him.
So they preemptively serve just to hold on to people.
Right. The behavioral result is preemptive serving. They suffocate their colleagues with support just to guarantee they won't be left behind.
I can see how that would create incredibly codependent workplace relationships. And the final schema.
The fifth is the defectiveness or shame schema. This is perhaps the most clinically painful one. It is the core belief that you are fundamentally flawed, broken, and unlovable just as you are.
That is a really quiet, insidious kind of danger. How does that translate into being an overperforming team player at the office?
By playing the perfect support character. If you believe you are fundamentally defective, you try to hide your true, flawed self behind a mask of absolute flawless utility.
So if you're perfectly useful, no one notices you're broken.
Exactly. If you are totally indispensable, if you never make a single mistake while supporting the star players, nobody will look closely enough to see your perceived flaws. You are basically trying to outwork your own shame.
Wow. So no matter which of these 5 schemas Alex is running, fear, approval, sacrifice, abandonment, or shame, the external behavior looks exactly the same to the company. He just looks like a dedicated, hardworking team player.
That is the tragedy of it. The company rewards the symptom of the trauma. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, all 5 of these schemas lead to the exact same psychological destination. This constant daily self-denial literally empties out the eye.
Empties out the eye.
It creates a profound inner void.
Because you're never actually being you. You are just a reaction to everyone else's needs.
Right. Biologically, emotions like anger, frustration, and personal preference, they are vital data points. They are signals. They tell us where our boundaries are and what we genuinely value.
Right, like pain telling you to move your hand off a hot stove.
Exactly. But when you suppress those biological signals for decades to appease others, those neural circuits essentially go dead. You don't just lose your energy, you lose your psychological self. You no longer know what you want for lunch, let alone what you want for your career.
That is really sobering. So we've looked at the sociological survival strategy of the giver, and we've dug deep into the clinical schemas formed in childhood. But I want to shift the lens from the individual to the environment for a minute, because it feels like this isn't just a me problem or a childhood trauma problem. The environment we live in, the culture, the modern workplace, it feels like it actively encourages, demands, and rewards this exact kind of suppression.
The sources heavily emphasize this point. We cannot look at this purely as an individual pathology. You have to look at the cultural pressure cooker that amplifies and weaponizes this behavior.
Right. The research touches on the East Asian cultural context, particularly in societies like Japan, to understand how culture scales this. Let's talk about the concept of the interdependent self.
Yes. So in many Western cultures, the ideal self is heavily independent, right? Standing out, breaking the mold, being the squeaky wheel.
The lone wolf innovator.
Right. But in Japan and other East Asian cultures, the self is primarily defined by its relationship and harmony with others. The ultimate social skill is reading the room, or, as it's phrased in Japanese, reading the air.
Reading the air. I love that phrasing.
It is the ability to anticipate needs before they are ever spoken and seamlessly adapting yourself to maintain the harmony of the group. It is not seen as suppression. It is considered a highly advanced form of social intelligence.
And to be fair, it is an intelligence. When you are on a team that has that kind of unspoken flow where everyone is anticipating each other's moves, it's incredible. But the sources draw a really sharp line here between 2 types of this behavior, right? Positive versus negative cooperation.
That distinction is vital. Positive cooperation is what you just described. It builds synergy, you deeply understand the group dynamics, but you also bring your unique strengths, your 100% capacity to elevate the whole. It's a dynamic additive process.
Okay, and negative cooperation.
Negative cooperation is merely stifling yourself to avoid friction. It is entirely defensive and subtractive. You aren't adding value to the group. You are just sanding down your own edges so you don't bump into anyone.
It's the difference between playing in a jazz band where everyone is listening closely and improvising together versus just turning your amplifier off so you don't accidentally mess up the beat. You aren't making music, you're just avoiding making noise.
A perfect analogy. And the text points out a modern technological amplifier that is making this negative cooperation universally pervasive, not just in East Asia, but globally.
Social media, right, SNS.
Social networking sites. The ultimate mutual surveillance machine. We now live in an era of hypervisibility.
Right.
The research highlights how this constant, unavoidable mutual surveillance creates a hyper fear of backlash. Think about it. In the past, if you set a boundary or expressed an unpopular opinion, the friction was localized.
You just argued with Gary in the break room.
Exactly. Now, every statement, every boundary, every slight misstep can be observed, judged, and criticized by a massive invisible audience.
And the punishment for getting it wrong isn't just a weird look from Gary anymore. It can be absolute social annihilation. You can be professionally ruined in an afternoon. So younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, They're essentially growing up in this digital panopticon.
They are, and the text described the sociological phenomenon resulting from this as the paradox of cooperation.
Okay, what is paradox?
To survive the constant surveillance, younger people are learning to act so impeccably inoffensive, so utterly frictionless, that they end up entirely unable to form deep, trusting relationships.
Wait, explain the mechanism there. Why does being inoffensive prevent trust?
Because you cannot build deep, resilient trust with a human being if you never actually see their true edges.
Oh.
Right? If someone never expresses a hard opinion, never shows authentic vulnerability, and never pushes back, you aren't interacting with a person. You're interacting with their PR representative.
That is so true.
You might not fight with them, but you will never deeply trust them because you simply don't know who they actually are.
That is fascinating. And this dynamic has to be wreaking havoc on the corporate world because businesses constantly claim they want innovation, they want disruption, they want bold ideas, but they are hiring a workforce that is terrified of causing even a micro-ounce of friction.
The corporate cost is staggering, and it's largely invisible to leadership. The text described this as a culture of over-adaptation.
Over-adaptation.
When everyone in the organization is over-adapting to everyone else, it completely suffocates creativity. You end up with these meetings where everyone politely nods, no one debates the flaws in the strategy, and no one challenges the status quo.
Because the cultural mandate is to manage the mood, not solve the problem.
Exactly. It's often mistaken for groupthink.
It's not groupthink.
It's actually worse than groupthink. In classic groupthink, people genuinely start to believe the consensus. In a culture of over-adaptation, everyone privately knows the idea is terrible, but they're all too busy reading the room and trying to be supportive to say anything.
Man. And what is the ultimate consequence of this pressure cooker?
Top talent quits out of nowhere.
Ah, the sudden resignation. You see this all the time on LinkedIn.
Yes. The manager's entirely shocked. They say, but they were our best team player. They never complained.
Right.
But they never complained because their internal schema, combined with the culture of negative cooperation, demanded they suppress their exhaustion. The invisible mental health struggles compound, the 80% throttle burns out the engine, and the person just breaks and walks away.
Okay, so we have the cultural pressure of surveillance, the childhood wiring of schemas, and the sociological survival strategy of avoiding the takers. But I want to pivot to something that completely shifted my perspective when reading these sources.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
What if we are looking at this entire phenomenon through the wrong lens? What if it's not just sociology or trauma or culture? What if, for a significant chunk of the population, their brain is literally physically wired on a hardware level to care more?
This is perhaps the most validating part of the research for many individuals. We are moving from psychology to biology. The sources delve into the biological reality of the highly sensitive person, or HSP.
Right. And I think it's important to clarify for you listening at home. Highly sensitive isn't just a pop psychology buzzword or like an insult. There is serious, hard neuroscience backing this up in the sources.
Absolutely. The clinical neurological term is sensory processing sensitivity, or SPS. Extensive MRI research shows this trait is present in about 15 to 20% of the human population.
15 to 20%, that's huge.
It's a massive demographic. Their brains, specifically regions like the amygdala and the insula, are fundamentally hyperactive compared to the neurotypical population.
So they are walking around with a completely different sensory antenna, but what does that actually mean mechanically? I hear amygdala and I just think fight or flight.
Precisely. The amygdala acts as the brain's threat detection and emotional processing center. In an HSP, the threshold for what constitutes a stimuli that requires processing is significantly lower.
So they notice more.
They are processing environmental and emotional data at a depth and volume that others simply are not equipped to detect. It's crucial to understand this is not a disorder, it is an evolutionary trait.
Right, like having a subset of the tribe highly attuned to subtle changes in the environment kept the tribe alive in the wild.
Exactly. But in a modern, hyper-stimulating corporate environment, it can feel like a neurological curse.
To help explain how this hardware actually operates in a modern office, the sources use a framework called DOES. But rather than just defining the acronym, I'd love to see how this actually plays out, because my initial thought was that being an HSP just meant you cry easily.
That's the stereotype, but it's vastly inaccurate. Being an HSP is like being a highly sensitive studio microphone.
Okay.
Your biological superpower is that you can pick up the beautiful, subtle tones and nuances that a standard microphone completely misses. But as you put that delicate studio mic in the middle of a noisy, echoing stadium like a fast-paced corporate office, it doesn't just record more noise.
It creates a deafening, painful feedback loop.
Exactly. So let's look at the D in the framework. Depth of processing.
Okay, how does depth of processing look for our studio mic?
Well, HSPs don't just hear information and categorize it. The moment data enters their brain, they instinctively start connecting it to past experiences, projecting future implications, and analyzing systemic patterns. They process everything deeply.
Okay, give me an example in the office.
So imagine a boss casually says in a meeting, "Hey, what if we change the launch timeline on this product from Q3 to Q2?"
The neurotypical person says, sure, let me check my calendar. What does the HSP do?
The HSP's brain instantly renders a massive, complex data file. They immediately see the 14 cascading downstream effects, the budget shortfalls, the bottleneck in the supply chain, and the emotional toll this will take on the graphic design team who are already burned out.
They see the entire web of consequences in an instant.
Yeah.
And the text mentions that this depth is incredible for strategy, but it's a massive liability in rapid-fire meetings. Why?
Because if you force an HSP to answer on the spot, they will freeze up. They literally have too much data rendering at once to formulate a simplistic one-sentence answer.
It's like the spinning beach ball of death on a computer screen.
That is exactly it.
It's not that the computer is broken or stupid, it's that it's trying to process a massive 4K video file while everyone else is just reading a basic text document. So if I'm managing an HSP, how do I fix that environment for them?
The solution is entirely structural. You provide meeting agendas 24 hours in advance. You utilize asynchronous chat for brainstorming rather than demanding real-time ping-pong ideas. You let their brain process the depth on its own timeline before demanding an output.
You literally give them the file before the meeting. I love that. Okay, let's move to the O, overstimulation.
Because their nervous system is constantly taking in so much data, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the crosstalk in the hallway, the frantic energy of a looming deadline, they hit sensory overload much faster than a neurotypical person.
I imagine open plan offices must be an absolute nightmare for these folks.
Open plan offices are the destruction of the HSP's focus. The visual movement in their peripheral vision, the phones ringing 3 desks over at run, it keeps their hyperactive amygdala in a constant state of mild threat response.
So they're exhausted before they even start typing.
They're burning through their daily energy reserves just trying to filter out the noise.
So the solution here is pretty obvious, but companies fight it. Quiet spaces, normalizing noise-canceling headphones, or just letting them work from home. The takeaway here is that hybrid work isn't just a cushy perk for an HSP, it's an operational necessity for them to access their actual talent.
Exactly. It's an accessibility accommodation, really.
Sure.
Now let's look at the E, emotional reactivity and empathy.
Okay.
HSPs have highly active mirror neurons. This means they don't just logically understand how someone else is feeling. Their brain simulates and literally feels the emotional state of the people around them.
So if 2 people on the team are having a passive-aggressive conflict over email, the HSP absorbs that tension like a sponge, even if the conflict has absolutely nothing to do with them or their project.
Yes, they become the unconscious emotional filter for the entire team, which is incredibly draining. They are processing the team's unresolved trauma on top of their own workload.
How do you protect them from that? Because you can't just mandate that everyone in the office be happy all the time.
No, but you can build structural allowances for nervous system regulation. The research suggests giving them explicit, stigma-free permission to step away.
Like taking a break.
Like a structured decompression protocol. If they have just completed a heavy social task, a tense negotiation, a difficult client call, or navigating a team conflict, they require a 20-minute solo walk to literally offload that absorbed emotional data. It needs to be built into their recognized workflow, not penalized as slacking off.
A designated decompression protocol. I love that. All right, the final letter in the framework, the tinus, sensing the subtle.
HSPs notice the micro-expressions that cross a client's face, the slight change in a manager's tone of voice, the tiny inconsistencies in a massive data set. This is an absolute superpower for quality control, auditing, and deep creative work.
But I'm guessing the dark side is that they get completely bogged down in the details.
Precisely. They obsess over the subtle nuances, constantly trying to guess what the unstated expectations are. And that inevitably leads to perfectionism, missed deadlines, and burnout.
They are staring at an email from the boss for an hour because the boss used a period instead of an exclamation point. and their hyperactive amygdala is wondering if they're about to be fired.
Yes, that is a perfect example of sensing the subtle turning into a threat response. The solution here is critical for managers to understand. You must provide explicit, numerical, objective definitions of done.
Right.
You have to stop making your HSP employees guess what you want.
So instead of saying, hey, put together a quick brief on this, which will cause the HSP to write a 40-page dissertation just to be safe, you say what?
You say, I need exactly 3 bullet points on this topic by 2:00 p.m. Do not spend more than 20 minutes on this task. When you completely remove the ambiguity, you stop their massive processing engine from spinning out of control on subtle, irrelevant details.
I want to highlight something deeply important for the listener here. If you are listening to this right now and having a moment of realization, if you are thinking, oh my God, I'm an HSP, this is my brain, you need to hear this clearly. You do not need more mental toughness.
No.
You don't need to read another book on how to just suck it up and be a shark. You need an infrastructure that matches your operating system. If you are that studio mic, stop trying to perform in a noisy stadium.
That is exactly the takeaway. You cannot outwork your biology. And that bridges us perfectly to the next critical question of this deep dive.
Which is?
Well, we have exhaustively diagnosed the problem from every possible angle, right? The sociological survival strategy, the childhood trauma schemas, the cultural panopticon, and the biological reality of the HSP. Now, how do we actually escape the trap?
Right. How does a person transition from the exhausted 80% capacity self-sacrificing giver to the thriving, powerful, other-oriented giver?
Yes, let's get into the solutions. And the sources lean heavily here on a psychological framework called self-determination theory, or SDT.
Self-determination theory. Let's break down how this actually frees people.
So SDT is a massive, highly validated framework in psychology. It posits that for human beings to achieve sustainable motivation and deep well-being, they need 3 basic psychological needs met: competence, relatedness, and autonomy.
Okay, let's look at our over-accommodating, people-pleasing individual through the lens of those 3 needs. Competence. Check. They are usually highly skilled and excellent at their jobs. Relatedness. Check. Everyone in the office loves them because they're constantly helping, sacrificing, and smoothing over friction. But autonomy?
Zero. You have absolutely zero autonomy because their actions, their helpfulness, and their sacrifices are not driven by their own internal values, desires, or goals.
What are they driven by then?
They're driven by guilt, by obligation, by the paralyzing fear of causing friction, or by those outdated childhood schemas we talked about. They are completely controlled by external forces.
So even though everyone around them is constantly saying, thank you so much, you're the best, we appreciate you, they feel entirely hollow because they didn't actually choose to be doing it. They felt they had a gun to their head.
Exactly.
So how do we rebuild that missing pillar of autonomy? The text lays out a specific process.
Step 1 requires a massive internal reframe. It requires shifting how you view and interpret your own negative emotions. For years, the people pleaser has viewed their own anger, their exhaustion, or their frustration as signs of moral failure or immaturity.
They tell themselves, I shouldn't be mad that they asked me to work the weekend. I should just be a better team player.
Right, constantly invalidating their own biological alarm bells. Step 1 is replacing that invalidation with fierce self-compassion. You have to intellectually and emotionally recognize that your anger and your exhaustion are not flaws. They are vital, healthy biological signals that your boundaries are being violated.
The sources use a great phrase for this that really stuck with me. Mama bear energy.
I love that concept.
It's so good because it recontextualizes the aggression. If you see a mother bear in the woods, she might seem incredibly calm and peaceful. But if you step toward her cub, she will absolutely destroy you.
And she should.
Right. You need to look at your own energy, your own time, your own health, and your own talent as that cub. When you say no to an unreasonable request, you aren't being a selfish jerk. You are aggressively protecting your inner capacity so you can survive and do your best work. You are roaring to protect your cub.
That fierce protective energy is absolutely essential to break the neural pathways of the subjugation schema. Once you have managed to summon that energy, you move to step 2. Emotional assertiveness.
Which the text connects to practicing what they call the courage to be disliked?
Yes. This is a profound hurdle. You cannot protect your time and your cub without someone, somewhere being disappointed in you.
That's the hardest part for the givers.
It is. Emotional assertiveness means sitting in the profound discomfort of their disappointment without immediately rushing in to fix it or apologize. A very practical tool the sources suggest for this is the mandatory pause.
How does the pause work in practice?
You make a rigid rule for yourself. Never agree to a request in the room. When someone asks you for a favor, your childhood schema will immediately scream at you to say yes to maintain harmony.
Your whole body just wants to say yes to make the tension go away.
Exactly. You must override that reflex. You say, let me sleep on it, or let me check my capacity and get back to you by end of day.
You're inserting a buffer zone.
Yeah.
You are putting space between the stimulus and the response, giving your rational autonomy time to actually make a decision before your trauma response answers for you.
Brilliant way to phrase it.
Okay, I have my mama bear energy. I'm using the pause to stop my reflex. What is step 3? Because this next concept fascinated me more than anything else in the research.
Step 3 is the ultimate goal, the final evolutionary form of the thriving employee, becoming the disagreeable giver.
Wait, you're telling me the hero of this story, the peak performer in organizational psychology, is the grumpy person?
In a way, yes. It sounds completely counterintuitive, but organizational psychologists revere the disagreeable giver.
Why?
To understand why, think back to what we discussed earlier about agreeable takers, the charming, smiling people who steal credit and exploit their peers.
The corporate sharks in nice suits.
Right. The disagreeable giver is the exact opposite of that toxic archetype.
So what does a disagreeable giver actually look and sound like in a meeting?
They often have a sharp tone. They do not care about pleasing you. They do not care about the vibes of the room. But, and this is the crucial defining part, they care deeply and profoundly about the success of the project and the true long-term well-being of the team. They are the ones who will tell you the harsh, uncomfortable truths that everyone else is too scared to say because they are over-adapting.
So while everyone else is nodding and saying, "Great idea, boss," the disagreeable giver says, "This marketing strategy is fundamentally flawed, and we are about to waste $1 million of the client's money."
Exactly. They have ironclad boundaries, they absolutely refuse to engage in fake small talk, and they can seem quite prickly on the surface. But they are the exact people who will stay late on a Friday night to help you manually rebuild a crashed database, simply because it is the right thing to do to save the project.
They just won't be artificially sweet or emotionally soothing while they do it.
No, they won't.
It's like the Gordon Ramsay of the office.
Oh, that's perfect.
Right. A rough, incredibly intense exterior, maybe they yell about the risotto, but fundamentally their entire motivation is trying to elevate the standard of the cooking and help the chefs achieve excellence.
Yes. So the core advice to the listener here is incredibly freeing. You can be deeply, profoundly helpful to your team without having to be artificially sweet, constantly smiling, or overly compliant.
You don't have to manage their mood while you help them. You can just do the work.
Precisely. You decouple your helpfulness from your desperate need for their approval. You give because you choose to, not because you need them to like you.
That is powerful.
But, and this brings us to the final and perhaps most important section of our deep dive, it is fundamentally unfair and frankly unrealistic to put all of this burden on the individual.
Right. You can channel all the mama bear energy you want, and you can practice being a disagreeable giver, but if you work in a company full of absolute vampires, you're eventually just going to run out of blood.
Exactly. If the organizational structure actively rewards exploitation and punishes boundaries, the individual will inevitably break, no matter how much self-compassion they practice.
So we must discuss systemic structural solutions. How do we design an organization that makes it psychologically safe for talented people to take off the 80% throttle and give their 120%?
Systemic solution number 1, according to the sources, is aggressively weeding out those agreeable takers.
We touched on them briefly when discussing the Matrix, but let's expose their mechanics because the text makes it clear they are incredibly dangerous.
They are the absolute poison in any corporate ecosystem. Agreeable takers are highly skilled chameleons. They kiss up to management. They're charming and charismatic in interviews, and they look absolutely fantastic in traditional top-down performance reviews.
Right, because their metrics are high.
But horizontally and downward, they are systematically exploiting their peers, stealing ideas, hoarding resources, and creating a toxic, paranoid environment that completely drains the givers.
The boss thinks they are a superstar destined for upper management, but the actual team doing the work knows they are a parasite. But if they are so charming to leadership, how does a company actually catch them?
Traditional top-down reviews will never catch them.
So what do you do?
The solution relies on rigorous, anonymized 360-degree reviews, but with a very specific focus. Management must heavily weight the evaluations on how this person treats people who cannot help their careers.
Oh, that's smart.
How do they treat the administrative staff? How do they treat the junior members? How do they interact with peers in cross-functional departments when the boss isn't looking? When you ask the people below and beside them, the facade of the agreeable taker crumbles instantly.
And the research is clear. Once identified, the organization must remove them, no matter how high their individual metrics are.
Without hesitation.
Because they might be bringing in $100,000 in individual sales, but they are invisibly costing the company $500,000 by burning out and driving away the 5 best givers on the team.
Exactly. The math of tolerating an agreeable taker never works out long term.
Okay, systemic solution number 2, monetizing the invisible work. The sources call this OCB, organizational citizenship behavior. This is basically all the stuff the people pleasers doing in that 20% bucket we talked about at the very beginning, right?
Yes. It encompasses mentoring new hires, meticulously documenting processes so others can succeed, resolving interpersonal team conflicts before they escalate, and organizing the knowledge base.
The glue work.
The glue work. These activities are the absolute lifeblood of psychological safety and team cohesion. But in most modern companies, they are completely uncompensated and unmeasured.
Right. You don't get a quarterly bonus for calming down Kevin in accounting so he didn't quit. You get a bonus for closing a deal.
Sad but true.
So the givers making the workplace actually function aren't getting promoted, while the takers aggressively focusing only on their own visible metrics rise to the top.
The systemic fix is to make OCB an official, compensated, highly weighted part of the formal performance review. If a company claims to want a collaborative culture, they have to literally put their money where their mouth is and pay for it.
That makes total sense.
When knowledge sharing, mentoring, and team support are monetized and tied directly to promotion pathways, the giver is no longer a martyr sacrificing their career for the team. They are a recognized, highly compensated top performer. It validates their natural inclinations and structurally protects them from being outpaced by selfish actors.
Make the invisible labor visible on the paycheck.
I love it.
Okay, the third and final systemic solution, the right to disconnect.
This is a structural necessity for stopping the cycle of over-adaptation and protecting the HSPs. The text advocates for strict, system-wide bans on after-hours communication, barring true, literal emergencies.
Okay, I have to push back on this one hard. In theory, that sounds great. But in reality, we live in a global asynchronous workforce.
Sure.
If my development team is in India and my marketing team is in New York and my client is in London, a rigid 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. email lock is going to completely break the supply chain. Doesn't this mandate just take away the flexibility that modern workers actually demand? What if I want to work at 10 p.m. because I had to pick up my kids at 3 p.m.?
That is the standard pushback, absolutely. But the research argues we need to separate the act of working from the expectation of response.
How do you do that?
The issue isn't you working at 10 p.m. The issue is the psychological burden your 10 p.m. email places on the recipient. What's fascinating here is that a rigid structural rule actually creates psychological freedom. Let's look at the mechanics of it.
Okay.
If you have an over-accommodating employee with a subjugation schema, and you send them an email at 10 p.m., their schema instantly activates. They agonizingly debate, do I reply now? If I don't, will the boss think I'm lazy? Should I just draft it and schedule send? Will they see I was online? That mental gymnastics drains their battery, even if they don't reply.
I see. It's the cognitive load of having to make the choice.
Exactly. But if the company's system literally blocks the email from arriving in their inbox until 8 a.m. the next morning in their local time zone, or if it's a widely known culturally enforced rule that expecting an after-hours reply is a fireable offense.
Then the boundary is made for them.
Yes. The structural rule relieves the individual from the exhausting daily burden of having to constantly defend their own perimeter. The system provides the armor. The employee can finally truly rest, knowing the organization is enforcing the boundary, rather than relying on the employee to constantly fight for it.
So the organization is basically saying, we know that many of our best people are biologically or psychologically wired to overgive and burn out, so we are putting up hard structural fences to protect you from yourself and to protect you from us.
Exactly. When you combine these systemic protections, aggressively firing the takers, financially rewarding the invisible OCB work, and structurally enforcing the right to disconnect with the individual's new mama bear energy and disagreeable giver mindset, the 80% throttle is completely removed.
They can finally safely unleash their true 120% capacity, knowing it will lead to success and fulfillment rather than exploitation and burnout. Wow. Okay, we have covered an incredible amount of ground today, moving from the individual to the systemic. Let's do a quick recap of the journey we've been on. If you are sitting there realizing that you are throttling your talent down to 80% just to make others comfortable, realize that it likely started as a highly rational sociological defense mechanism to avoid the target on your back and survive the takers.
But you must also recognize that this strategy likely mutated into a dangerous trap due to early childhood schemas like subjugation or self-sacrifice, and was then massively amplified by a modern culture of digital surveillance and negative over-adaptation.
So to break free, you need to understand your own biological wiring, especially if you're an HSP acting like a sensitive studio mic in a loud stadium. You need to stop invalidating your own exhaustion, channel that fierce mama bear energy to protect your capacity, and strive to become that boundary-setting, truth-telling, disagreeable giver.
And ideally, you must demand or help build an organizational structure that protects you from takers, values your invisible contributions, and enforces your right to disconnect.
So here is your call to action for this week. I want you to look at your calendar right now. Find one meeting, one interaction, or one upcoming project where you know deep down you are already planning to shrink yourself. You are planning to use that 80% throttle to manage the mood of the room. And I want you to practice holding your ground. Practice using the pause, setting a firm boundary, and expressing your true, unedited 100% capacity. Just try it once and see what happens when you don't manage their emotions.
And as you prepare to do that, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We spent this entire deep dive talking about how shrinking yourself, how holding back your immense talent is a strategy to protect you from burnout, from envy, and from exhaustion. But I want you to completely flick the perspective for a moment.
Okay.
Consider this. What if the people you have been so desperately protecting with your 80% output, the people whose fragile egos you've been managing for years, what if they actually need to see your 120%? By playing small to make others comfortable, you might be actively depriving your team, your family, or your industry of the exact inspiration, the exact necessary friction, and the exact disruption that they need to actually evolve. What if your true 120% isn't a threat to the people around you, but the very thing that sets them free to grow?
So maybe it's time to stop towing the luggage, shift into fifth gear, and show everyone how fast the car can really go.